now.
All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us at today's webinar. My name is Ethan Gates, and I'm the software preservation analyst at Yale University. And for those who maybe aren't fully aware already, Yale University is the host to the EaaSI program of work. So today we are presenting Why EaaSI, a system overview, which is going to be a roundtable discussion with Mark Suevecki, Don Brower, Christian Dahlhausen, and Chip German. Your EaaSI staff lead for this episode is going to be Klaus Rechert, lead emulation architect for EaaSI. This webinar is kicking off the first in our series of 4 that's going to cover key components of the EaaSI program of work. Just some Zoom housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box in your Zoom control panel. Jessica Meyerson is going to be monitoring them during the presentation, and I will, I'll bring them back up during our Q&A session at the end so we can present those to our fabulous panel of speakers here. Also, please mute yourself and turn your video off during the webinar to maximize the quality of the recording if you can. You should be automatically muted when you are joining the Zoom call, but just a reminder that helps us a lot with these large calls. So all webinar recordings in the future are also going to be made available on the EaaSI website with transcripts, so don't worry, you're not going to miss anything. So I'm just going to start off by introducing our guest speakers and members of the EaaSI network. Mark Suevecki is the data curation developer at the University of Notre Dame's Hesburgh Library. He works on their institutional repository, Curate-ND. He has also worked in research and high-performance computing, as well as corporate IT, and holds degrees in computer science and mathematics, and is pursuing a master's in library and information science. Don Brower is a product owner for the University of Notre Dame's institutional repository, again, Curate-ND. And before that, he was a software developer and lecturer. He has a PhD in mathematics. Christian Dahlhausen is a DevOps engineer at Academic Preservation Trust at the University of Virginia, working on maintaining and automating the AP Trust Preservation Repository. Prior to his work at UVA, he worked for multiple startups as a software engineer, DevOps engineer, and data scientist. Christian is a German citizen and holds degrees in business information systems and systems engineering. And Chip German is program director for the Academic Preservation Trust based at the UVA Library, where he is also senior director for scholarly communication. He's about to take on additional duties as the interim associate university librarian, yay Chip, for research and learning services. And he previously served as vice president for information resources, libraries, and IT at 2 medium-sized public universities, and before that, worked for 20 years at UVA in a range of jobs, including chief of staff to the president. So it gives me great pleasure. I'm going to hand it straight over to Klaus Rechert, our EaaSI staff lead, who is going to introduce us with a system overview of the key components of EaaSI and how EaaSI is different from EaaS. So Klaus, take it away and tell us, what is EaaSI?
Greetings from Freiburg. My name is Klaus. I'm representing the OpenSLX company. It's a spin-off from the University Freiburg, and together with the team here in Freiburg, we were the developer of emulation as a service. And now we are so happy and excited to be in part of this project and actually improving the emulation strategy. So I'm going to share my slides, one sec. So since we do not have a lot of time, I don't want to do a deep dive into all the philosophical and technical aspects of emulation. Let's just quickly define and reiterate the terms and the goals of an emulation strategy in context of research, of libraries, museums, and archives. The problem set actually is depicted on the top. User-provided objects to be rendered, to perform, or to run. So it's not only that we have a huge number of objects, but we have a huge number of different file formats. So, and additionally, the objects are maintained by users and stored and managed independently. To render these objects, we require technical runtime consisting of software and hardware, and that's what we call, so on the middle layers, that's what we call a software environment, which is usually a combination of an operating system and installed software. Software remaining on its original media, like software to be installed, is considered as an object and should be treated on the top level, maybe with some additional properties and additional metadata. Well, and then to make software environments work, we need appropriate hardware. If not available anymore, we need a hardware equivalent, or what we call emulator. And the goal of this whole thing is actually to make emulation scale, especially in context of so many objects and the diversity of users and how they want to access these objects. So this is the EaaS technology stack. So what we did is we translated these 3 layers into individual components, also organized on 3 layers. On top, we have the object archive suitable to store and to maintain user uploaded objects in a very simple version, or in a more complex version, connect to a user or to an institutional repository. And of course, on the bottom, we have components to manage and to orchestrate emulators. And all this is well stored and maintained independently, because well, the user owns its objects and wants to, and they're stored at the user side, and emulation as a service provider, or as the service provider maintains the emulators. So we have, we use technical metadata to bind these 3 layers together. And what we do is we combine these layers based on the technical metadata we have on demand. So this is, here comes the as a service part. So given the metadata, we can reenact the whole stack. So in this example, we run an emulator with a pre-configured Windows 98 and pull a user uploaded object from the object repository, all on demand and all yeah, in a distributed fashion. So why EaaSI? Well, emulation as a service scales well so far technically, but it did not scale well with users. So EaaSI, well, the goal of EaaSI is to make emulation easier and more accessible, improve usability and the UI. The UIs will be improved by which will be presented in a different webinar, I think so. Make emulation a truly distributed emulation service. This is what I covered today. Improve discovery and description, as well as the access option. But I'm focusing today on the more technical part and on the vision as emulation as a truly distributed service. So the goal is that someone produces this environment and puts some effort in producing a proper Windows 98 environment, and to be able to share this. So we, as part of this project, the Yale University Library will provide thousands of pre-configured software environments. So we need infrastructure to share these among the EaaSI network. once they are available in the EaaSI network, you should be able to improve them because, well, not everything is set up properly or the way you like it in the first run. So we want to give you the tools to improve any environment and to share it again, to be honest. And we want to, if someone has the technical metadata and downloads or replicates an environment, the environment should be reproducible. Like it should run the same way or more or less the same way as it has run at the producer side. For this, we had to improve what we call the image archive. We split it in two parts. You have the private part now, where this is your work area, where you build the environments, you work with the environments, and improve whatever needs improvement. After you've done and you think certain environments are worth sharing, there will be a public environment and a button where you can publish them and make them available. Optionally, we can assign these public environments handle entry. Complementary, we introduced a remote archive, which is essentially OA IPMH harvester. So this system, this is complementary to the public archive, which is OA IPMH provider. This is the way we anticipate to share environments and metadata among the EaaSI network participants. So how does it work? You have a remote, you have a list of all available remote environments which can be searched. You search for something like an Ubuntu environment, and then you can replicate it, work with it, and share it, and publish it again. We also improved the object layer. We added a simple user upload object archive, but more importantly, we allowed direct access to objects where we have the metadata. We also have a connector interface which has currently only a partly integrated implementation for Preservica. More is to come. And on the other hand, to make emulation setups reproducible, we containerized emulators. So we use the container technology just to have hashes and a repository where we can pinpoint certain versions and to independently store and retrieve emulators. So if you publish an environment, we note the version of the emulator used in this environment and put it into the metadata. So if someone is replicating that environment, the emulator itself is also downloaded into the EaaS infrastructure implicitly, so that this environment is started with exactly the same emulator the producer has used to create the environment in the first place, to reduce all the additional problems that can occur if you move an emulation environment from one emulator to another one. Also part of the runtime infrastructure is a complete new EaaSI installer, which should reduce the hassle to install EaaSI a lot. EaaSI is still a complex product, but Oleg, my colleague Oleg, tried very hard to make it as easy as possible to install your own instance locally. And the whole setup is now cloud ready. We are very close to publish a cloud instance, but also to publish a cloud installer, currently only tailored for the Google Cloud, but more is to come. Some important links and repositories. I think most of them are also available on our website. There is the EaaSI handbook, which covers both the installation side, but also the user side. We have the EaaSI installer. It is available from GitLab. Very important if you do the installation to tag the latest release. And all the packaged emulators are also available on GitLab. So that was the basic overview of what EaaSI is, what we have done previously in EaaSI and what EaaSI can do right now. We still have a year to go, so there is more development to come, and hopefully there will be another webinar where we explain the new developments on that. So
perfect. Thank you so much, Klaus. This was fantastic, and I'm really impressed at how briefly you got through so much information. So thank you so much. We're going to take this opportunity to transition into our moderated discussion with our node hosts so they can take this great information that we've gotten from Klaus and see what it's looking like sort of on the ground in the organizational context at our various node hosts. So how this is going to work, I'm going to pose a few questions to our node host representatives, Mark, Don, Christian, and Chip. I'll pose a question and direct it first off straight to one of our representatives who will go on, and I'm keeping an eye on time and moving us along through each of the questions. Everyone will get at least one question before we move on to audience Q&A. But if we have time and others from our panel want to chip in with some of their own experiences, that'll be great. But I'm going to start off with Chip for our first question. So Chip, could you talk about what interested you and University of Virginia in becoming a node host in the first place? What, looking at presentations like this from EaaSI and seeing what kind of content or user needs at your organization this could help address?
Yeah, happy to do that. You able to hear me okay?
I can hear you perfectly. Thanks, Chip.
Great. So I'll broaden the notion of it. I think answering the question of why we're interested in this technology is the answer to why we quickly jumped at the opportunity to be the node host. So I'm going to go a little higher up, and it all boils down to something that we'd like to do that we can't do now. The metaphor I always overuse is this one. Depends on which part of the elephant you touch, how you answer the question of what engages you the most about exploring this technology to solve your problem. And when you think about it, the notion of emulation and software preservation is some elephant, big size. The possibilities for emulation to extend the usable life of software are pretty wide ranging, and I think you can illustrate that by thinking about the questions, the breadth of questions that you could ask along these lines. So it could be like, what kind of software are we talking about? Are we talking about commercial software or custom-built software for research purposes by our researchers at our institution, for example? What do they want it for? For example, it might be making games playable long after their platforms are obsolete, or it might be verifying the results of research. Who's trying to use it? I'll put myself in a couple of roles here. It could be me in my pajamas on my home laptop, or it could be me, the researcher, doing very focused research work at a workstation in a special collections, I guess what we used to call and still call reading room. It's the last example that drove some of UVA's interest. A specific case that comes up, we're using it both in the EaaSI project and the related FCOP project that will probably come up for discussion a little later on too. And that is a specific case that involves the gift of digital papers from an architect to our special collections unit here at the UVA library. It includes materials that depend on an evolving set over the work of this architect of versions of design software. So that's a clear-cut use case and one that drives our interest in part. For me personally, the driver was more about the pioneering digital projects that faculty at my various institutions had put together, dating back mainly to the late 80s and early 90s. All of them have software and operating system dependencies, and all are suffering through, for us to keep some access to them right now, they're all suffering through what we kind of euphemistically call deprecation, which I think in fact is life support by cutting off some important functionalities, and that's sort of like keeping a patient alive through a series of amputations. Emulation just seems like a much more attractive option to me and to us in general. You know, that image sort of makes me think of RoboCop, the movie RoboCop, but I don't want to extend that too far. Goes astray really quickly. But the point is, faculty digital projects have been a major motivator for me, and I'm happy to say for others here who are involved in similar work. But those kinds of use cases drove us to thinking that emulation offered a great opportunity for the development of another tool to try to get at this kind of problem. And we were happy to volunteer to be in a node role to make sure that we contributed to the larger community work on this, as well as looking after our own interests and our own needs. So I'll stop there.
Perfect. Chip, thanks so much. I think that's a great opportunity to, I mean, a really great summary of the high level, needs that EaaSI can fulfill and emulation can fulfill. I'm interested to transition over to Mark. Given what Chip is saying, I'm assuming that at Notre Dame, there are very similar broad user needs in terms of access to digital papers, special collections, resolving software dependencies on software dependencies, deprecation on deprecation. But could you speak a little bit more about the specifics of deploying and testing EaaSI to solve these problems? And in other words, to go into integrating the EaaSI platform into the broader technology ecosystem at your organization. What are some of the challenges that you're seeing in actually applying emulation as a strategy?
Sure. Can you hear me?
I sure can. Thank you.
Okay. Well, the big driver for us, our university is 4 years into a 5-year what they call a cloud first initiative. So we are trying to get out of the data center business. So our particular node, if we were going to put it up, we had to do it as a cloud service. And here in the Notre Dame Library, we have an enterprise group that has a cloud infrastructure using Amazon Web Services. So that's the route that our particular node chose to use. I'm going to just touch on the specifics of that implementation briefly in the chat. I actually put a link to a web post that I did back early in our beta testing that goes through the gory details if you want to be down in the weeds. But very briefly, right, we actually have stood up the EaaSI instance as an Amazon EC2 instance, and all of the installation instructions and configuration are built into what's called the CloudFormation script. So it's very easy for us to tear down and reinstall the system. One of the things, as we've been testing, that we've been finding out in our infrastructure, pretty much all of our backend storage is cloud storage. And as we went through the EaaSI testing protocol in beta, it was we found out kind of by trial and error that there were, in the current implementation of EaaSI, there were a lot of configurable options that, if you didn't set them, you were going to run the EaaSI server out of space. So by trial and error, we've pretty much learned in the last 2.5 months or so, to get all of our emulation images and our Docker temp space and everything else off of our box and into Amazon hosted storage. I think another thing we're still working on is we're not at a production capacity. There aren't many groups in the library that are using this. It's really just the 4 of us here that are working on the EaaSI project. And so we don't have a good feel for how we're going to size this. And so we're still trying to come up with a resource budget, if as far as, how much disk we're going to need, if say we have 100 emulated titles, or, how many concurrent emulations could we support, things like that. And I think at the very end, and this is maybe something that Klaus could touch on a little bit, is some of the things we're going to have to do to actually get EaaSI to work in our larger technological infrastructure is that our legacy software collection and some of the curated software source that we have. I mean, we would like to be able to run software that's in our catalog through a link that's in the catalog, and part of doing that in our ILS will involve the person being, is going to have to use our identity management system. So we don't really have any sort of identity management hookup on top of our EaaSI layer. We have a real simple login and password. And our university is in the process of actually transitioning to a new identity management system. In fact, we're cutting over in 2 weeks. So part of the work for us for EaaSI would be, getting, tying that in with like our institutional logins so that we could offer links to our EaaSI emulations in our cataloging, or say through our institutional repository. And this is a little off, but another thing right now is that the emulations we have done in testing, we have done ourselves, and we have a group here at Notre Dame that actually does, they do digitization as a business, and I'm sure they're much better at IaaS. So I have piles of things, like Apple versions of Galaxian and what have you, that I need to tie in an expert rather than me being the bottleneck.
Sorry, I just want to thank you for bringing in those examples, Mark.
Everyone needs Galaxian and Oregon Trail. Yeah.
I did want to chime in on your previous point about identity management. Klaus might be able to say more about this, but I just wanted to point out for everyone that is absolutely on the roadmap for, I believe, fall release to work on authentication integration. If Klaus has any more to say about that, or any of Mark's other points.
Integration, not only authorization and authentication, but integration is a very important aspect of the second year. We were working on that. We are trying to find a proper middle ground to cover, because every institution has slightly different requirements and a slightly different system setup. So we are trying currently to figure out what is an appropriate middle ground for instance, authentication integration.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Klaus. I really appreciate everyone sort of, in the network bearing with us as we, kind of figuring out what it takes to scale emulation services infrastructure by doing it and working that out along the way. As long as we have just a quick moment here, I would be interested if Christian, as the sort of DevOps, Mark's counterpart over at Virginia, if there are any infrastructural concerns that you're thinking of that you want to bring up, as long as we're on this topic, anything that Mark didn't mention.
Not in particular, but it actually, the previous topics were quite a good segue for my question. If I can continue with that.
Yeah, let's just go into that, I believe. Christian's mentioning that we have a question lined up for him as the big challenges for adopting and provisioning EaaSI as a service on campus. And so I think you're right that this discussion leads pretty naturally into that one. So let's just go ahead there.
Yeah. So I gave it some thought, and I thought like for me or for us, there's like 4 major areas or challenges for provisioning and adoption of the EaaSI service as a common good service in the library. One is the integration part, like Klaus mentioned, with the different landscapes of different institutions, integrating the EaaSI service into them and making them available to use for patrons and library staff is certainly a challenge to integrate it. And also the provision for use is also one I feel like requires manual work to identify systems or system configurations where objects run in or should run in. Like, for example, Autodesk CAD software has had a lot of versions, and I know from previous work experience that some of the versions, like some of the CAD drawings that were made in AutoCAD 12 or whatever, didn't work in 13 and had to be migrated in order to be accessible and be used. And I think there's some aspect of manual curation, if you want, as to provide that access to different digital items. Then the other thing is cost, like Mark mentioned earlier, that it's uncertain how a service would be used and how many people will use it, and how to size the infrastructure and the staff for correct usage is a little bit difficult. And I know that in the EaaSI project, we make an effort to estimate that and take data from from other project members to get a better estimate on that. And then the last point I want to bring up is actually a long work from UVA mentioned that to me, is staff training and user outreach. Like I said earlier, the creation of emulation environments for the digital items may have to be done manually, and also public outreach to the patrons and making them aware of the service that we have, and making users understand what benefit or how much easier it could make their work if they had let's say Windows 95 with AutoCAD 10 or something to in order to open all the digital objects. Yeah, I don't know which.
I want to plug. That's our October webinar, which will be specifically on configuration workflows, and for anyone who that particular aspect of the project piques their interest, we'll definitely be diving more into that. Where I guide that, since that is a lot of the work that I do as well. Yeah. Since you've brought up users and sort of transitioning into user services and what EaaSI looks like once it gets to them, I think that's a good moment to thank you, Christian, to sort of pass over to Don. How do you see this EaaSI platform fitting into your portfolio of user services? Existing library access systems at Notre Dame. Are there specific departments or services at Notre Dame that you've already considered integrating this with, been speaking to? Can you step back a little bit maybe at this point and talk about that?
Sure. Yeah. I don't think we've necessarily found every place where EaaSI could fit in this, but we have a few places where we're starting. So, I mean, naturally providing access to our old digital content, such as old CD-ROM titles, or old supplementary discs that came with books, purchased books, as one of our first use cases. Of course, this is going to evolve too as we work on this is also evolving with our digital preservation strategy as that gets worked out as well. Another place where we've seen it possible use is with, like, we kind of see the EaaSI as sitting like kind of next to the repository. So like if there is content in the repository that could benefit from it, could we also use EaaSI to help support access to those files? Such as we do have some software in there, including some people who like deposit like not only the source code, but also like the jar files for like a mobile app. I don't know why, but they have it. Another place where we looked is like special collections with like artifacts and like that they have received, such as like hard drives, thumb drives. Like can EaaSI be used to provide access to those files? Possibly will be like more locked down instance. Maybe like you have to be on premise, but there, like, and also for, as Mark mentioned, we have our Center for Digital Scholarship has a retro computing collection with like Apple IIs, Commodore 64, TRS-80s, and one problem with that is we only have so much hardware, but then we also have a software aspect to the collection. So can EaaSI help provide a way to have broader for access to that software? So that's actually an interesting thing, is that the EaaSI can support other CPU types than just like the Intel platform. So we can use those kind of things. I'm excited about that. And then in like a bigger user service picture, which is still very fuzzy right now, is can we use EaaSI to help support research data services? And I'm not really sure what that would look like at the moment. Like it's just kind of vague. Like this is supporting like either research software, I don't know necessarily to like to review or interpret results. Like maybe like someone put all this stuff like in Kaleidograph and we need to see it, or even like, is it something kind of more like with like something like ReproZip or something like Vicky Steves works on, can we make like a bundle of a software and then also have like an emulated platform that it runs on, so we can have, so this is more thinking about preservation, not accessing old legacy content, but can we figure out a way to like actually have a format for preserving current content for the future? And I think that's probably the most exciting thing, but it's very fuzzy right now. So
yeah, no, I think that's a great point to bring up, that that because this is part of the broader software preservation discussion, there are ways in which EaaSI or emulation service platforms can help not only legacy collections, but there are these very intriguing possibilities for data being generated today, and envisioning what services could come out of that is an exciting aspect of this project. I'm curious if anyone from the Virginia team wants to sort of chime in here on the same question in terms of possible services or different applications, for patron use and user use that they're seeing in their context.
I think Don's sort of a list of examples are pretty similar to ours. We really we have a lot of very practical people here with very practical problems to solve, and as soon as we're able to show them what this is capable of doing, and we prove its scalability and manageability to deliver from a staff perspective and physical perspectives, like does it have to be on a dedicated workstation? Can it be used in a distributed fashion? Those kinds of questions. I think I could give you a list of 10, and after we were able to show it to the rest of the librarians here, we'd have a list of 150 uses that pop into people's minds right away. It's got really wide-ranging potential.
Yeah, I would say, speaking from the EaaSI staff team, part of the challenge is often scoping this idea into proving what we can do in a certain amount of time, just because the possibilities are so endless. But like, we are so excited that to find out what that means when we take these big ideas and actually apply them in institutional contexts. Are there any other sort of thoughts on our current line of discussion from the panel before we perhaps even just start taking questions from the audience? Because I can see we've already got a few good ones lined up.
just want to make a quick remark on the research data side and the research data management side. This is a really emerging and hot topic because we now see that data is intervened with software. So you need, it's likely that you need software to make sense of the data in the future. Emulation is one tool to do that, but what we currently saw was mostly visual access, interactive access to like CD-ROMs. To make research data management workflows, even in an archived way, work, we need to think about new ways of access, like non-interactive access, machine access. This will be one of the major future directions of the development of the access part of EaaSI.
Great, thanks, Klaus. Yeah, and thanks everyone for this sort of first round. Thanks, Don, Mark, Christian, Chip, for guiding us through this first round of questions. I want to go ahead and take some time for questions from attendees now. As a reminder, if anything has popped up during this session, or if anything's popping up into your head right now, please just type your questions into the Zoom group chat, and we'll snag it and make sure we communicate that to our speakers. I want to circle back. There was a question from the University of Toronto, I believe, on Mark's presentation that either you, Mark, or perhaps Klaus could clarify. Could you expand on what you were saying about running out of space without proper configurations, and what exactly the issue was there when you were implementing?
Sure. So I think our one of the underlying technologies in EaaSI is Docker, and so Docker has a number of overlay file systems. And what I found was that by default, if you don't configure it, the Docker, its working storage is in the root file system of the EaaSI server. So when I actually got to the point where I had enough, emulations and things that I was copying around, I was, no matter what I did, I was always running the EaaSI file system out of space. So I ended up configuring Docker. In fact, this is our general solution for anything we have to store for EaaSI. We store off of the machine in a persistent AWS volume, which we attach. When we rebuild the machine, we detach it, and then we just reattach it. So it's just finding all those little places. So what we ended up doing for Docker is we changed the data root to write all of the Docker temp files and overlays on our persistent off box storage, and now it works fine. Does that answer you, University of Toronto? Okay.
Yes, we're getting it. Thank you. Perfect. Thanks, Mark.
I may add a few things.
Yes, please, Klaus.
Yes, we need some space to work on, especially, and that was a major issue. We need some temporary space for repackaging emulators. As I thought, we use Docker or the Docker repository or the GitLab repository to package emulators to make it convenient to retrieve them and to work with them locally, and to have a assured version, assured with a hash, that you actually have the exact same version as the other one. This requires some space. We don't use Docker for the emulators locally, so we download a lot of data and unpack it and rework it. As Mark pointed out, we improved it over time. So we factored out most passes which require space. So you have now configuration options where you can factor out a follow directory where you actually have space, where you can put temporary storage on. We are trying to improve this together with you and to make the documentation as comprehensible and to actually make people aware of these issues.
Yeah, and I think this is a great point to bring up the documentation, Klaus, since we had another question from Stephen Klein about, again, where we can find technical documentation about EaaSI. We should, given that there was, you had such limited time in your opening presentation, there is clearly a lot of detail that we can't get through in the webinar, but we should emphasize that all of our documentation and the open source code for an EaaSI node is available through the EaaSI GitLab page. So if that's gitlab.com/EaaSI, you'll find our repositories, and the user handbook is a great place to start in terms of leading you where to go to those repositories, how to download, because again, we should emphasize that even though the sort of some of the networked pieces of the EaaSI network are for legal and intellectual property reasons that we'll get into in a future webinar, keep us from sharing certain pieces of information about how to link EaaSI node installations. They're absolutely available for anyone to try running at their own institution. So we would emphasize starting there and keeping an eye on the GitLab page for all code and documentation purposes. Let's see. I'm going to see if there's any other great questions in here. We've got a question from Gerard Cohen from the Preservation Policy Posse. Love that posse. Are there guidelines for researchers not currently requiring emulation to record their environments in an easy, understandable, reproducible, or ingestible way? He's thinking of the fast-moving digital landscape, dependencies, scientific reproducibility. I think this is speaking to some broader software preservation workflows and how EaaSI fits into that. Basically, the question of how to prepare possibly materials for ingest into EaaSI in a broader workflow sense. Would anyone from the panel, maybe Chip or Don, like to speak on that, or have had any thoughts on this question?
I'll jump in really quickly with just a very broad comment. And I think, Krista, everybody has highlighted the issue of the complexity of the environments and how important it is to have a clear understanding of essentially metadata of all the components, because EaaSI as a library of possible elements that could be placed together to create a virtual environment seems to me to be pretty flexible and growing with additional software made available through it. And so the trick is putting the combination of things together necessary to build the environment that's needed to accomplish the specific task. So it does seem to me that it's like we're always telling researchers, we need metadata. That's my particular take on it, and I invite the others to refine that with smarter comments.
And yeah, well, absolutely. Again, I just got a reminder from Jessica that that's another one of our webinar topics down the line will be on metadata and optimizing metadata for software collections to work with these workflows. But if anyone else has thoughts right now, yes, sorry, that webinar is in September. Thanks, Jessica.
I mean, I think my thought is just like this is also pointing towards like software preservation in general, which is as Chip said, huge, and what works for one person will probably not work for another. And I also think that there's not really even a consensus on what it means, like, or how much or what exactly qualities need to be preserved. Like, I think it's a very open question. So like we as an institution don't really have any policies around necessarily software yet. So as far as preservation, yeah, I don't know. It's a huge question.
An ongoing discussion that we're also having with the crowd in the FCOP project, as Chip mentioned earlier. Yeah, it's part of a broader conversation. Yeah. let's see, I just want to make sure we have time to get through all these questions. So Aaron Davis from Colorado State Archives is asking about the pricing structure for the service, and is it space-based subscription? He's also interested in how integration with Preservica would look. I mean, I can answer off the top that for at least the first round of funding for the EaaSI project, which is through June 2020, it is a sort of guided, targeted network model of partnership with specific institutions, as in discussions. But for the business model side of what EaaSI will look like beyond June 2020, we are working with the Educopia Institute as a project partner to investigate those models, whether a subscription or space-based model makes the most sense. That is part of the research and investigation into infrastructural models that EaaSI is, as part of the EaaSI program of work. And yes, and we should also mention that nodes are, tracking their infrastructural and staff costs as we go along here in this first project, so we can get that information to future partners, future institutions, so they have a better idea of, whether it needs to be a data-driven cost model or what have you, what makes the most sense. But we can actually offer firm numbers, firm research on that to others, if that answers that question. And Preservica specifically, I mean, maybe Klaus would be able to talk a little bit about this, about how integration with Preservica could look. It's I know from Yale's end that it's possible.
It's very brief. It was a pilot to see how we can do this in general. It's currently constantly evolving. What we can do basically is retrieve objects like CD-ROM objects or similar from a collection from Preservica, together with some metadata, and make it available seamlessly in EaaSI. So you can browse them in EaaSI and just run them. That's the very brief version of it, if you're interested.
Yes, sorry, I know that. Integration with larger services is a question for sure. That again gets into specifics of each particular repository or management system that you're talking with, but definitely things we're interested in investigating down the road. There's a great last question here, I think, that'll help us wrap up, from Michelle Palillo from Cornell. Could we talk a little bit more about the end user experience and how an end user runs an emulator, whether it's a browser or locally on their computer? I think Klaus can maybe speak to a little bit about what current end user access services look like.
Well, the typical end user access is via browser, so the user does not have to do anything, but the system is provided either by the local institutions like the university library as a reading room setup, or as a cloud setup in a more private cloud setup, or as a service provider as well. So the user is just using a browser-based interface where he clicks and naturally interacts with the environment. There are other access options which are more targeted to museums, which run of a pen drive, of a USB pen drive. So there are flexible options, but the typical option is browser-based access by the user.
Yeah, and I would just want to I think this is a perfect opportunity to plug the public EaaSI sandbox, which is being released hopefully later today. There, watch for the Software Preservation Network Twitter account. This is basically, we are excited to launch a version of the EaaSI platform that is accessible to all, because it is populated entirely with open source software and open source environments. But that is going to be, that's going to be a sandboxed, controlled environment where anyone is going to be able to launch that and explore a little bit and get a better sense of what this browser-based access that Klaus is talking about looks like, and what environment administration and management might look like from a UI standpoint. So that's please again watch the Software Preservation Network website and Twitter account for some blasts coming out about that extremely soon. We've covered all of our questions here, so I just want to give one more chance to the group chat to see if anything else has come up.
So there's a question about the CD-ROM.
Yes, I'm just going to say it out loud. We've got one from Gerard Cohen again on how you get over the hardware and format issue in like a CD-ROM example.
So we require that the CD-ROM is already imaged as an ISO image, and then either we allow the user to upload it directly from his computer, or ideally the CD-ROM is part of a connected repository where it can be retrieved on demand.
Yeah, and as I think Jessica mentions, that we are going to get into more details of that workflow, both from a metadata and configuration perspective in future webinars, the metadata one coming in September and configuration in October. So please keep an eye out for those and rejoin us then. One last chance. We're still not quite at the top of the hour. So can we post the sandbox URL? Not yet. I think we are working on just some last minute touch-ups, but we will have that. Please, again, watch the Twitter account. It's very soon, I promise. I'll throw it back to our guests and our panel if there's any kind of last thoughts from our great roundtable of guests. Is there anything else that you wanted to cover in this session before we wrap up?
This is Chip. I'll just emphasize the plug for the next episode, the August one, on the legal and institutional policy frameworks. The reason I thought of that was in the question of what the user experience is like. Some of that has to do with what's appropriate use under the law for some of the emulated environments that we have, and you can hear a much more detailed discussion of that from the experts in that space who will be at that August.
Yeah, so that's a great transition into our wrap up. Thank you, Chip. Reminder for everyone to join us in August for our next episode in the EaaSI webinar series. As he said, that's EaaSI Legal and Institutional Policy Frameworks. We're going to be joined in that webinar by Syl Schaefer from UC San Diego and Brandon Butler from the University of Virginia, and the Software Preservation Network's Law and Policy Advisor there. So that will be led by our EaaSI project investigator, PI Ewan Cochran, and we really thank everyone for joining us today. I want to again thank Mark, Don, Chip, and Christian, and Klaus for guiding us through this fantastic EaaSI overview. I hope everyone here learned a lot, has some questions. Keep the questions coming at us through your preferred platform, and we will see you next month. Thanks, everyone.
Huge thanks to everyone, speakers and attendees included. That was great. Thanks.